Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
We're going to be more than half healthcare today. Let's start with Exhibit C in Iran. I just don't think there's too much to discuss there. We have a stalemate that will go on indefinitely, and it's hard to imagine anything that will change the stalemate. The U.S. really doesn't have any options, and I don't think Iran does either. It's interesting, the traffic through Hormuz is pretty low in the last couple of days because there's an entity in the UK that is independent. I think it's financed by ship owners, and it announces the ships that go through on either the Omani side or the Iranian side. And basically, because of projectiles, they call them, so you don't know whether it's a missile or a drone, into the engine room of a cargo ship that was Abu Dhabi. The traffic going in or going out of Hormuz is limited, rather than being 15 or 20 ships a day, no ships a day. You see the impact in the crude oil market. I suppose what may happen is that Iranians, for whatever reason, may relax a bit. I think certainly to have some Iraqi oil move is possible. I think I mentioned last Wednesday, probably not just possible, but likely that the Iranians will move some amount of oil into Iraqi facilities and export it that way. And I don't think the U.S. Central Command, the Navy blockade, will be able to figure out that a 2 million barrel VLCC headed for China or Korea or Japan or something is part Iranian oil. Now, Chris Wright, our Secretary of Energy, is doing a smart thing. His department, which is very good on energy statistics, is coming up with an estimate each day, each week, on how much oil is passing through Hormuz. If more ships start to go through, will that make the WTI trading at 90 plus a little, trade at 80 plus a little? Yep, I think so. But I don't see a set of circumstances where the U.S. gives up its blockade and its sanctions, and I don't see a set of circumstances where Iran gives up control over Hormuz. And they have too many drones and too many missiles for us to take care of from the air. The alternative, if you wanted to eliminate the threat from Iran, would be ground troops. I see no way that a U.S. president puts ground troops in Iran. There's a stalemate. There will always be backwardation meaning that the future price is less than the current price. You could see last Thursday the current price was 82 and the 27 price was 73. I think as the current price moves closer to 90, I don't think that the 27 price will come up by more than $1 or $2. And that is the price that we should be using to evaluate investments in companies. That is the price that the companies use to evaluate their own investments. No one makes decisions based on $80 or $90. Gas has done a little better. You can see last Thursday was under $3, but that 27 price has been holding in at around $3.40. Hopefully that'll be maintained. One thing I have noticed, the gas supply, which 2/3 of the increase in gas supply in the United States comes from the Permian, and the higher the oil price, the more gas there is, the lower the gas price is. Also, there have been new pipelines announced to bring gas from the Permian down to the Gulf Coast. So Waha is now trading, and new pipelines are in operation. Waha is now trading not too much more than 50 cents below Henry Hub, which is a terrific development for people in the Permian. But that gas supply estimated at 110.5 Bs a day in 27, that's going to have to move up. And in fact, The 108.5 for 26 is going to have to move up. It's already running on average more than 109. And once again, it's that gas coming from the Permian. What we need is an increase in demand for gas from power, which is still pretty much on the flat side. I must say the LNG feed gas is running higher than 18 this year and 20 for next year. So I think the incremental supply will be taken care of by incremental demand, but it would be great to see more progress there in making power natural gas. Exhibit A, I just comment on Exhibit A, and then I'll try to get some commentary from Mike and Jason on this. Long term, we always said without a reduction in the fiscal deficit in 27, there would be problems. Maybe the problems would be a treasury auction. Maybe the problems would be some problem in the repo market, where your treasury inventories are financed for the most part. Either one of those things might happen, but it looks like there's going to be significant pressure on politicians, not only in the U.S., but also in China and Europe and Japan, to curtail government spending because deficits are just too high. And you see this in long-term rates. And long-term rates, not only in the U.S. Treasury market, but in China, in Japan, in Europe. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Now that the Democratic Socialists are winning a few primaries anyway, their mantra is Medicare for all. And if you look at our 27 spending, let's look at our 26 spending, the next to last column. The only place to save real money in this column, where we're spending $7 trillion, is in healthcare. You can't do too much with interest. Don't think you can do too much with defense. The Trump administration is saying they don't need $1 trillion for defense. They need $1.5 trillion. They know they're not going to get $1.5 trillion, but certainly they're going to try to take congressional approval for $1.1 trillion or $1.2 trillion, even without the incremental cost from the activity in Iran, because you have to redo a lot of the military to take account of drones and missiles and use of AI and whatnot. To think that defense spending will stay flat or go down, I just think is totally unrealistic. Interest is what interest is, and as long rates are up, the average interest rate in 26 will be 3.5%. I don't think the Fed funds rate is likely to come down anytime soon, and your 10-year bond is now 4.6. So I don't see any progress on that front. The one thing that sticks out is if you cite across, Medicaid is $600 billion. Medicaid is about half financed by the federal government and half financed by the states. If you said Medicare for all, certainly you'd spend more than $1.2 trillion. But how much more? Would you be able at the same time to say to the states, or the federal government say to the states, you don't need the federal allocation of Medicaid funds because we're covering every person, all 320 million of us. And so initially, theoretically, you'd save most of that at $600 billion. So that's the only thing I can put my finger on. Could you increase taxes? I guess you could. What really finances, if you look at the revenues, what really finances the revenues really go up are the darn payroll taxes, which are regressive. Could you collect more than $500 billion from corporations? I sure hope so. All those tariffs that Trump talks about is in that excise tax category, which is up maybe $200 billion. He says, oh, we'll be able to do tariffs and we won't have to do income tax. That's silly. It's not even close to being realistic. I think we're kind of stuck. And if it's not the repo market and it's not a treasury auction, but it's the 4.6 going higher, now people will say if it goes to 5%, that'll be notable because it's a round number. I'm kind of thinking that if we don't do some positive things here, and if our 26 deficit, which is a fiscal year that ends, I can see us sitting here next year talking about it being 5.5 or moving higher. At some point, there's going to have to be bipartisan effort on spending, and I hope it's sooner rather than later. Mike, Jason, any commentary on that?
I think, at least for Medicare, the amount of improper payments is pretty well estimated to be at 6%. And then fraud, depending on which side you listen to, is between 3% or north of 10%. I think if you start addressing some of those things in the Medicare spending, that at least buys you a year or two to figure out a real solution.
Now, I'd just like to quit cold turkey all Medicaid. And it'd be odd because you have conservatives and the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party advocating for the same things. It's just get rid of Medicaid and go to Medicare for all. Mm-hmm. That, the last couple of Wednesdays, we've been focused on the gap between demand for compute and supply of compute, or demand for tokens and supply of tokens. And we do have one other thing that's happened this week that we'll want to cover, but we've kind of undercovered healthcare, and we do have some significant healthcare news this week. We turn to page 15. There are two companies that distinguish themselves by coming up with a COVID vaccines with the mRNA technology. One was Moderna and one was BioNTech. BioNTech has been much more conservative about how they spend. So if you look at page 15, they still have most of the cash that they made from being Pfizer's partner in the COVID vaccine. And Moderna has run their cash down, so that when they got to the balance sheet date here, which was March, they were down to only $3 billion of cash, where BioNTech was $15 billion. But, and Jason's, when we've ever contrasted Moderna with BioNTech, Jason said, yeah, but the question is who gets there with a significant cancer medicine based on this technology. And Moderna announced the results of a trial today, and the stock has doubled. So over to you, Jason. It turns out if it was between the tortoise and the hare, I guess the hare is winning as of today.
That is true. Yeah. We always liked BioNTech better because they were the safer bet. They were better stewards of their capital, as it seemed. But Moderna got there first. So what was announced, and I'll set up what the study was, and I'll let Montana discuss the details of the results. But they have a joint development project between Moderna and Merck, and this was a phase 3 study where they were providing patients with there were more advanced cases of melanoma, so stage 3 and 4, and they gave them a treatment of, first they surgically removed the melanoma, and then they gave them Keytruda, and then in one arm, and the other arm got Keytruda plus an mRNA cancer vaccine. And the study was run, this development project has been a decade in the making. So the positive results being announced today, they had a press release discussing that they met all their endpoints. They didn't actually release their data, but validates all the science that they've been doing at least the last decade as far as it relates to cancer, which happened to set them up nicely when the pandemic started, and they were able to quickly transition that to a vaccine for a virus. But really, this is the root of what both Moderna and BioNTech were set up to do. So Montana, if you want to discuss the implications of the results.
Sure. So what was released today, as Jason said, is essentially that they've met their endpoints. For this particular trial, this was a stage 3 trial. They were hoping to reduce the rate of recurrence and avoid the cancer metastasizing or basically spreading to other organs. So what they've said is those were met. What we think that means is that they were able to reduce the rate of recurrence after you have cancer once. So they did a surgery, resected as much of the melanoma as they could, and then they did a dose of Keytruda, which is the current standard of care for cancer. And then they did an mRNA vaccine after that, which is basically priming the immune system so that it's able to identify cancer cells. Because the primary issue with cancer is a mutation in the DNA causes the cell to keep rapidly dividing, and there's no stop point or end point for the cancer to stop growing. And those mutations have an antigen on them that sort of flags that cell as different, but because it's produced by your own body, the immune system doesn't fight it. What these vaccines do is basically identify those antigens using a DNA sequence. I believe Moderna was using Illumina, and that goes into their software. I believe it's Mastero, and that gives them 34 specific antigens to look for. Each cancer will have thousands of antigens, so they look for the 34 most prominent antigens, more than 34, and the structure of the mRNA vaccine falls apart. Those are then covered in a lipid, or basically a fat, that allows the mRNA to enter into the organism without being attacked by the immune system. It's then read as normal DNA, and that primes the immune system to target the cancer cells. So rather than relying on chemotherapy or radiation to target those cells, if there were to be an episode of recurrence, the immune system would be able to fight that quickly. So with the results of reduced recurrence, they've proven that the mRNA is able to prime the immune system and treat that recurrence before it becomes a full tumor. The metastasizing is when it moves from, this was particularly melanoma, so when it moves from the skin to any other organ in the body. And that, the vaccine basically prevents it from growing any further than it already is, and will prevent it from moving further.
Montana, I know this is an unfair question, but maybe you come back next week. How far away is BioNTech from having some like results?
As Jason had said, we don't actually have the data points for this study. We only have the press release from this morning. I think it was about 4 hours ago. They don't typically release results during a study. Now, BioNTech and Moderna have several other phase 3 mRNA vaccines currently being tested and going through the clinical trial phase. The amount of time until we get results from BioNTech is still undetermined, though. We'll have to wait until those phase 3 clinical trials come to a head.
Montana, I've got a question for you. There are 9 other studies with this same drug being pursued for different cancers by Moderna. How should investors think about the likelihood or the ability of the same drug working on different cancers?
So the difference between a typical drug and what they're doing here is this is tailored to an individual. They're doing, okay, we know you have melanoma. We know these are the mutations that cause melanoma. We're going to treat these 34 mutations as our target. So they're essentially proving the technology rather than the drug itself. There's no medication within this drug that would be proven effective. It's activating the immune system that's already there. What these results prove is basically this works. mRNA will activate the immune system and will treat a cancerous cell. So it comes down to the genetic sequencing and the amino acids present that are causing these antigens. It's basically, are the flags going to be consistent? We don't expect the flags to be the same on any cancer, but the strength of the antigens or the volume of antigens on a cell will differ. I would assume that based on the fact that it's been successful once, they've proven that mRNA is a successful way to activate the immune system based on antigens, that would follow in any other cancer that has a similar, there's a hard tumor cell, it's going to have antigens on it. If they can identify those, the immune system can target it.
Great. My next question is something that you covered more specifically in the webinar that we did. And for those of you that are listening, Montana has been doing a fellowship with us for some time now, and she's did a very thorough webinar with us, and we published it to the podcast feed. So I'll make sure I put that link in the podcast, but discussing minimal residual disease. And I believe this study was utilizing some of those methods of detecting cancer in order to determine if the drug or the procedure here was actually successful.
Yeah, so the MRD testing can be utilized in a couple of different ways. And the way we've seen it most commonly used to this point is as a monitoring tool. So they'll do a blood sample, and then they will sequence that to identify any cell-free tumor DNA. So when you have any tumor, any cell in your body naturally dies over time, and it enters the bloodstream so that you can get rid of that, and you don't have a bunch of dead cells. The tumor cells follow the same process. There's just more of them. So when they do a blood test, they're able to monitor the levels of tumor DNA within your bloodstream. So they're using that to guide treatment protocols. As far as I know, on this particular study, again, we don't have all of the information. They haven't been using MRD testing specifically, but they have been using genetic sequencing to identify those antigens. And that's sort of something we've seen through all of the different upcoming cancer treatments and next generation cancer treatments, is that they're heavily reliant on genetic sequencing, because that gives us a picture of exactly what's going on within the host or within the patient impacted by cancer. We're able to say, okay, it's these mutations that are causing the problem. That can tell us what vaccine is going to be the right vaccine to give. It would also tell you if there's a high prevalence of cancer within your bloodstream. If those numbers are trailing downwards, your treatment's effective. If they're consistent, your treatment isn't making it better, but it's also not making it worse. So it is doing something. And then if we don't see any change, that would tell us that whatever treatment is being done is not effective, and give them a chance to change treatment options before a typical end of treatment PET scan would be done.
Montana, you're the greatest. We if we can work it out and have you here next week, so we will know more about the Moderna situation next week. But we have to switch over, Montana, to agents, because Grok, one of the models this week, made agents available. So rather than develop your own agent, you get one off the shelf. And Jason's been predicting this. So, Jason, how does this look to you? Do you feel vindicated, or how do you look at the Grok agents?
I don't feel vindicated. I think it was inevitable. Yeah, I haven't played with it yet myself, but it seems like it's a more user-friendly version or way to build and deploy agents. And anecdotally, I've been hearing stories that people are able to set up their agents much faster than it's taken Mike and I to set ours up in the past, since we're building a lot of things, I guess, from scratch. But the Grok tools set it up to make it easy for you, and you can build an agent within a day, whereas we've been tweaking ours for weeks and months now. But yeah, I think eventually it moves this way so that every consumer, it's at a level where any consumer can easily set up an agent to perform work or daily tasks for themselves, that it'll just be an app, I think, ultimately on your phone. It's a personal assistant in your pocket.
Yeah. So previously it took you many hours to set up a or Hermes, or even learn to use Cloud Code. Now you can just download this application onto your desktop and start doing many of the things that we've set up.
Yeah.
I still feel very good about what we've built internally, but there may be a point in time when you can buy something off the shelf that's actually better.
I know we keep saying it, but AI is just software. And I think this is a step along that path where it's just an app or a piece of software that you install and you configure it, and it is smart enough to do all the things you ask it to do, and you don't think twice about it.
What we've been watching since the initial introduction of ChatGPT is models getting progressively better. Today you have 3 models that are pretty close to exactly the same level of intelligence. That's the latest Grok model 4.6, ChatGPT 5.6 Sol, and Anthropic's Gemini or Opus 4.8 or whatever number they're on at this point.
5 now, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think it's on 5. So with those 3 models, they're all highly capable So you should not be surprised to see that each one of those companies has moved into the application layer. And this XAI's first step into that application layer. The other two, Anthropic and OpenAI, have developed a handful of things. Obviously, the ChatGPT app, the Claude app, but also Claude Cowork has been a very successful product that Anthropic has released. So you see these companies moving into the application layer fairly aggressively.
Jason, Mike was out in the ocean last week. He didn't participate as fully, but for those who weren't on the call last Wednesday, vast amount of time was spent mostly by Jason explaining how the gap between demand for tokens and supply of tokens is wide and might get wider, with Grok making agents available rather than using OpenClaw, which I guess people started to do in February. Doesn't that gap of demand or token consumption as compared to supply, doesn't it just widen further in the next period of time?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a big driver that's coming one day is an app like this, like a Grok agent, or if it's native in the iPhone, is shipped on every mobile phone and everyone starts using it. And that's going to be a huge uplift in token demand. And I just assume this doesn't exist today because there's just not the compute to serve it. So they haven't turned it on.
I've heard rumors of Elon Musk has talked about creating its own phone. They're going to have their own 5G LEO constellation network. So I would not be surprised to see that happen. And then on the token side, there's a great chart that we'll include in the video version of this that shows the proportion of tokens that are done through the ChatGPT app versus agentic tokens that are done through OpenAI's Codex. And as you'll see in the chart, it's really just been a linear progression. And now it's at 64% of tokens consumed through OpenAI are being done agentically rather than human interface prompts.
Yeah. And on me personally, as the price of tokens decreases, I keep cranking up. And now I only use my Claude app on max effort.
Yeah.
So I wanted to use as many tokens as possible.
Anything else newsworthy on page 1, 2, or 3?
There's a Nvidia deal to essentially backstop the shell of a data center, which is an interesting issue. Presumably it's because they've already solved the GPU financing side of things, but there's a large data center in Ohio in which Nvidia is stepping in to backstop the shell, which is a relatively small percentage of the total cost of doing a data center, but it's still a significant number, and it needs to be done ahead of time, ahead of the chips. Ben Thompson had a pretty good piece about this today, talked about why NVIDIA is doing this, and he says it's essentially a form of discounting where instead of actually discounting the product, they are taking on risk. And I guess that's one way to think about it. I don't have a strong or formed view on it. OpenAI is the ultimate customer for this particular data center, but as these data centers are fungible, I think this is all fairly copacetic.
Yeah, there is an analysis being developed that data center development will slow down enough so that in 2, 3, 4 years, there'll be an oversupply of chips without data center sites to put them in. And in fact, Jensen Huang, the founder and head of NVIDIA, makes that point in discussing this project in Ohio. And so the governor of Pennsylvania has come out with a 1-year delay. The governor of New York has a 1-year delay on new projects. The governor of Texas, who's running for re-election, is in effect imposed that kind of delay by this letter to his regulators saying that any new projects ought to be subject to an audit to make sure that they're good for all Texans. I think the people at the forefront here such as Nvidia and their founder, CEO, are quite concerned about having enough land, having enough power, having enough places where where they can get commitments from the government, zoning commitments or what have you, or emissions commitments to put in these data centers. So that, I was talking to Mike and I talk every morning. The thing about this development of models and the capability and whatnot is extraordinary, but it is more happens in a month than used to happen in a year. So it's at a very fast pace. Some of the opposition to data centers may be just people thinking, oh, my kids won't be able to get jobs, or I'll have to retire early because of you equip someone with these capabilities, they can do the work that 5 or 6 people used to do. So, Jason, Do you think that's part of what's going on with all these kind of holds on state and other holds on data centers?
Oh, absolutely. Public sentiment's not great. And it's not just the data centers. We're seeing it out here, at least, and with robo-taxis. I guess the majority of the vocal people are saying they don't want autonomous vehicles either. I don't know. Maybe being optimistic. I think it's the complete wrong way to look at it. Is you could graduate and there is so low of a bar now to starting your own business and being educated on a lot of topics that I'd be excited to be a graduate now. You have many more tools at your disposal to start a company than you ever did in the past.
Yeah.
The two of you would have become entrepreneurs sooner.
I think
sure.
so.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. On that note, we're definitely over our time, and everyone be well and stay healthy, and we'll be here exactly 7 days from now. Thanks very much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
The views expressed on this podcast are the host alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the host nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The host and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned. The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you. Thank you for joining us this week. Please tune in again next week as we will be back on Wednesday. As a reminder, nothing on this podcast should be considered investment advice. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.